The projector light was still warm on my face when Marcus started clapping. Slow. Deliberate. Patronizing. "Great effort, Blake," he said without looking at me. Then he turned to the room. "But leadership requires presence. Decisiveness. Authority." He handed the promotion to Troy, who had used my slides. My research. My strategy. My hands stayed folded on the table. My jaw stayed tight. My heart felt like it was collapsing inward, folding in on itself until there was nothing left but a dense ball of rage I couldn't show. Marcus leaned closer and said quietly, just loud enough for me to hear, "You're just not leadership material." The room avoided my eyes. 12 people who'd worked with me for 3 years. 12 people who knew exactly whose work Troy had presented. Not one of them said anything. My name is Blake Carter. I was 28 years old. And for 3 years that man had blocked every promotion I'd earned. That was the moment I stopped asking. This wasn't the first time he'd done this. It was just the most public. Year 1 had been different. My performance review said, "Exceptional execution." My project outcomes exceeded every target. Client satisfaction scores were the highest in the department. The promotion decision came back, not quite ready. Marcus had sat across from me in his office, his hand resting on my evaluation file a little too long. Like he was considering something. Like he had power and wanted me to know it. "I just don't see confidence," he said, tapping the folder. I'd swallowed it. Nodded. Asked what I needed to improve. He'd been vague. "Just keep doing what you're doing. It'll come." I'd believed him. I'd thought if I worked harder, performed better, exceeded more expectations, he'd see my value. I was wrong. Year 2 started with Marcus assigning me the Carter Industries account. The biggest client pitch we'd had in 5 years. I spent 3 months developing the strategy. Researching their pain points. Building a solution that addressed every concern they'd raised in preliminary meetings. The night before the presentation, Marcus reassigned it to Troy. "You're a team player, right?" he'd said, smiling. Troy got mentoring lunches with Marcus. Golf outings on weekends. Visibility at executive meetings. I got extra workload. Every project Troy couldn't handle came to my desk. Every deadline he missed became my emergency. Every client complaint he generated I fixed. Marcus praised Troy in meetings for outcomes I'd delivered. "Troy really pulled through on the Henderson account," he'd say while I sat 3 seats down knowing I'd spent 2 weeks salvaging Troy's mistakes. When Troy presented the Carter Industries pitch using my slides, my research, my strategy word for word, Marcus had stood up and applauded. "This is what leadership looks like," he'd announced. I'd started saving emails after that. Every assignment. Every deadline. Every piece of feedback. Every project handoff. I created a folder on my personal drive labeled Performance Documentation. I backed it up 3 times. If Marcus wanted to rewrite history, I'd have the receipts. I stopped defending myself in meetings. I just documented everything instead. Marcus began subtly reframing my work in meetings. If Blake had been more proactive with client communication. If Blake had better presentation skills. If Blake understood strategic thinking at a higher level. Each sentence was small. Individually they sounded like constructive feedback. But cumulatively they were deadly. My reputation shifted inch by inch. Colleagues who used to ask my opinion started hesitating. Clients who'd requested me specifically started accepting whoever Marcus assigned instead. Troy's star rose while mine dimmed, even though nothing about our actual performance had changed. I watched it happen in real time and knew exactly what Marcus was doing. He was building a narrative. Creating a story where Troy was the natural leader and I was the competent worker bee who'd peaked at my current level. The truth didn't matter. Perception did. I stopped trying to correct the record publicly. Instead, I documented every meeting. Every reframing. Every subtle put-down disguised as feedback. The folder on my personal drive grew larger. I didn't know what I'd do with it yet. But I knew I'd need it eventually. Year 3 started with a performance review that made my stomach drop. Marcus slid a document across his desk. "Your attitude concerns me," he said. That word. Attitude. The document was vague. No specific incidents. No concrete examples. Just narrative language about resistance to feedback, and difficulty with collaboration, and concerns about cultural fit. I read it twice while Marcus watched me. "I don't understand," I said carefully. Can you give me examples of when I've been resistant or difficult? He'd waved his hand dismissively. It's not about specific moments. It's about patterns. About how you carry yourself. I'd nodded. Signed the document because refusing would have made things worse. Then I'd gone back to my desk and photographed every page with my phone. That night I compared the review to my documentation. Every project delivered on time. Every client satisfied. Every metric exceeded. The performance review had nothing to do with my actual performance. I realized something important that night. This wasn't about merit. It never had been. After the public humiliation when Troy got my promotion, I locked myself in the restroom. I didn't cry. I just stared at myself in the mirror under harsh fluorescent lights. My reflection looked tired. Older than 28. Worn down by 3 years of being diminished. I whispered to my reflection, "Stop trying to win here." Something shifted in my chest. A release. A clarity I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't going to convince Marcus I was valuable. I wasn't going to earn his approval through perfect performance. I wasn't going to change his mind. I needed to change the game entirely. That night I opened a spreadsheet on my personal laptop. Not for work. For something else. I'd been investing since college. Nothing dramatic. Just consistent contributions to index funds and careful stock picks. But I'd also been doing something Marcus didn't know about. Side consulting. Helping small companies with the same kind of strategic planning I did at work. The money had been adding up quietly for years. I looked at the numbers and realized something. I had options Marcus assumed I didn't have. I'd been investing for years. Quietly. Aggressively. Carefully. 10% of every paycheck went to retirement accounts. Another 10% to individual stocks. Another 5% to a high-yield savings account that Marcus would have laughed at as too conservative. I'd also started side consulting 2 years earlier. Small projects on evenings and weekends. Nothing that competed with my day job. Just strategic planning for startups and small businesses that couldn't afford full-time staff. I charged reasonable rates but worked efficiently. The money added up faster than I'd expected. I'd never flaunted any of it. No luxury car in the parking lot. No designer clothes. No expensive vacations posted on social media. I lived below my means deliberately. Drove a used Honda. Lived in a modest apartment. Saved everything else. Marcus had always assumed I needed this job. That I couldn't afford to leave. That I had no leverage. He was wrong. Then I saw something that changed everything. The quarterly financials had been distributed to senior staff. Marcus left his copy on the printer. I'd picked it up to return it to him. But I'd glanced at it first. The numbers weren't good. Marcus had made risky expansion decisions over the past 2 years. Overleveraged contracts with clients who paid slowly. Inflated projections that didn't account for market changes. Aggressive hiring without corresponding revenue growth. The company looked successful on the surface. But underneath the foundation was cracking. I recognized the signs because I'd seen them before in companies I'd consulted for. The pattern was always the same. Aggressive growth pursued for ego rather than strategy. Short-term wins prioritized over long-term stability. Warning signs dismissed because acknowledging them meant admitting mistakes. Marcus thought he was untouchable. The board loved him. He'd grown revenue significantly over 3 years. But revenue wasn't the same as profit. And growth wasn't the same as stability. I made copies of the financials before returning them to Marcus's office. That night I started modeling scenarios. What would happen if client payments slowed? If market conditions shifted? If any of the overleveraged contracts fell through? The numbers weren't pretty. The board probably didn't know yet. Marcus was good at controlling narratives. Good at highlighting wins and burying concerns. But they'd figure it out eventually. Marcus forced me to attend a networking event for professional development. I knew what it really was. He wanted me visible enough to look good but not important enough to matter. That's where I met Vanessa Chin. She was a private equity partner who'd built her reputation on identifying undervalued companies and turning them around. We ended up talking for 30 minutes about market trends and strategic planning. She asked questions that showed she actually understood the work. At the end of the conversation she handed me her card. "If you ever want to talk about opportunities outside your current role," she said, "call me." I'd nodded politely. But I'd kept the card. 2 weeks later, after Marcus excluded me from another leadership meeting, I called her. We met for coffee. I didn't tell her about Marcus or the promotion or any of it. I just asked about her work. She told me about companies she was watching, market conditions, investment strategies. Then she said something that stuck with me. Companies don't fail overnight. They rot slowly. The trick is seeing the rot before everyone else does. I started asking very careful questions. Marcus excluded me from a major client strategy meeting. He didn't even pretend to have a reason. Just sent a calendar update removing me from the invite list. I didn't protest. Didn't send a confrontational email. Didn't complain to HR. Instead, I scheduled lunch with Vanessa. I told her about the financials I'd seen. The expansion decisions that didn't add up. The contracts that looked good on paper but had serious risk exposure. She listened without interrupting. Are investors nervous? I asked. She set down her coffee and looked at me directly. They should be, she said. The board is starting to ask questions about sustainability. About whether current growth is real or just accounting magic. She paused. Why are you asking? I'd prepared for this question. Because I think there might be an acquisition opportunity. She'd smiled slightly. I think you might be right. Over the next week, she confirmed what I'd suspected. The company's valuation had dipped quietly. Investors were getting nervous about Marcus's management style. The board was starting to look for stability rather than flash. There was an opening. Small. But real. The company's valuation dipped again the following quarter. Not dramatically. Not enough to cause panic. Just enough to make investors nervous. Vanessa called me on a Thursday evening. I've been talking with my partners, she said. There's interest in a minority buy-in. Someone who understands the business from the inside. Someone who could provide operational stability. My pulse raced. How much of a buy-in? Minority stake initially. But structured with options for majority control if performance targets are met. I understood immediately. They'd buy in small. But if Marcus continued mismanaging, they could push for more control. Potentially full control. Would you consider partnering with us? She asked. This wasn't revenge. This was leverage. This was using Marcus's own failures against him. This was taking control. Yes, I said. We spent the next 3 hours on the phone discussing structure, timeline, and conditions. By midnight, I'd committed to the largest financial decision of my life. And Marcus had no idea. For 6 weeks, I analyzed everything. Cash flow statements. Client contracts. Liability exposure. Employee retention rates. Market position. Competitive threats. Vanessa's team handled the financial due diligence. But I provided operational insight they couldn't get from documents alone. I showed them which clients were high risk. Which contracts had unrealistic terms. Which expansion plans were built on wishful thinking rather than data. Marcus's arrogance was embedded in the numbers. He'd assumed growth would continue indefinitely. He'd dismissed concerns as pessimism. He'd prioritized looking successful over being sustainable. The more I analyzed, the clearer it became. The company wasn't in immediate danger. But it was vulnerable. One major contract falling through. One market shift. One economic downturn. And it would collapse. The board was starting to see it too. Vanessa confirmed they'd been asking more questions lately. Pushing back on expansion proposals. Requesting detailed risk assessments. They're looking for stability, she said. Someone who can actually manage what's been built instead of just building bigger. I worked 18-hour days. My regular job during business hours. Due diligence at night and on weekends. Marcus never noticed. Marcus exploded in a board meeting. I wasn't there, but I heard about it from 3 different people. The board had questioned his latest expansion proposal. Asked for more detailed financial projections. Pushed back on timeline assumptions. Marcus had taken it personally. His hand slammed the table. His voice cracked. He'd accused the board of not trusting his vision. Of being too conservative. Of not understanding the market. The board had sat in silence. For the first time in 3 years, Marcus had looked unsure of himself. One board member had asked quietly, "Are you open to operational support? Someone who could help manage execution while you focus on strategy." Marcus had refused immediately. "I have everything under control." But he didn't. And now the board knew it. Vanessa called me that night. "They're ready," she said. "The board wants stability. They're tired of managing his ego." We had a 2-week window. After that, Marcus might figure out what was happening. Might take defensive action. We had to move fast. We structured a majority buyout contingent on leadership restructuring. Translation: Marcus would be removed as CEO. The proposal was elegant. Investment capital in exchange for operational control. Vanessa's firm would take a significant stake. I would take a smaller but meaningful position. And most importantly, I would step into operational leadership. The vote would be close. We knew that. 2 board members were loyal to Marcus. 3 were fence-sitters who could go either way. 2 were already frustrated with his management style. We needed 5 votes to pass. We had 2 guaranteed. We needed to convince 3 more. My name was nowhere in the public documents. Not yet. The proposal identified me only as internal operational candidate with proven track record. Vanessa and her team pitched it as a stability play. A way to preserve growth while adding professional management. The board scheduled an emergency session for the following Monday. I spent the weekend in my apartment reviewing everything one more time. Making sure we hadn't missed anything. Making sure the case was airtight. By Sunday night I couldn't do anything else. I just had to wait. I sat in my apartment on Monday evening while the vote happened. Phone face down on the coffee table. Television off. Just silence. 3 years of humiliation balanced on one decision. 3 years of being told I wasn't good enough. Of watching less qualified people get promoted. Of having my work stolen and my reputation undermined. All of it came down to 7 board members deciding whether to trust Vanessa's proposal. My phone buzzed at 7:43 p.m. I stared at it for 10 seconds before picking it up. One text from Vanessa. It passed. 5-2. I read it 3 times to make sure I understood. It had passed. The board had approved the buyout. Approved the leadership restructuring. Approved everything. I sat there in silence for a long time. Then I stood up, walked to the window and looked out at the city lights. Tomorrow everything would change. Marcus didn't know yet. He'd find out in the morning. I went to bed early. I needed to be rested. Tomorrow was going to be a very long day. Marcus didn't know yet when I walked into the boardroom Tuesday morning. I wore navy. Calm. Measured. Professional. He was already there, sitting at his usual spot at the head of the table. Confident. Relaxed. In control. He gave me a dismissive nod when I entered. "Observing today?" he asked with a smirk. Like I was a child being allowed to watch the adults work. I didn't answer. Just took a seat along the wall where non-voting attendees sat. The board filed in. Their expressions were neutral. Professional. The chairperson, Mr. Harrison, cleared his throat. "Thank you all for attending this special session," he began. "We have significant announcements regarding company ownership and leadership structure." Marcus leaned back in his chair. He thought this was routine. Maybe some investor update. Maybe some strategic planning discussion. He had no idea. Mr. Harrison continued. "Effective immediately, company ownership structure has shifted following a majority buyout approved by this board." Marcus's smile faltered slightly. "What buyout?" Mr. Harrison looked at him directly. "Majority stakeholder position now belongs to the investment group led by Chin Partners." Marcus's face went pale. "You sold the company without telling me?" "The board made a decision in the company's best interest." Mr. Harrison continued reading from the document in front of him. "In addition to the ownership change, the board has approved a leadership restructuring. Effective immediately, operational control transfers to a new chief operating officer." Marcus sat up straighter. "Who?" Mr. Harrison looked across the table at me. "Blake Carter." The silence that followed was absolute. Marcus's smile froze. His eyes locked on mine. His face drained of color completely. "What?" he whispered. Mr. Harrison's voice remained steady. "Blake Carter has been appointed Chief Operating Officer with full operational authority. This position reports directly to the board and the new majority stakeholder." Marcus started laughing. A short, sharp sound that didn't match his expression. "This is a joke," he said. "Blake? Blake Carter." He looked around the table waiting for someone to confirm it was a prank. No one spoke. The laughter died in his throat. "You can't be serious," he said, voice rising. Blake isn't qualified. Blake doesn't have the experience. Blake has never managed anything at this level. I met his eyes and spoke for the first time. Yes. Me. Then I opened my folder and moved to agenda item 2. Marcus stared at me like I'd betrayed him personally. You? He whispered again, like saying it multiple times would make it less real. Kept my voice level. Professional. The board conducted a thorough review of operational performance and strategic direction. They determined that new leadership was necessary. This is insane, Marcus said, turning to Mr. Harrison. You're replacing me with someone I've supervised for 3 years? Someone who couldn't even get promoted. Mr. Harrison's expression didn't change. Blake wasn't promoted because you blocked every advancement opportunity despite exceptional performance metrics. Marcus opened his mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. I made judgment calls about readiness, he said weakly. You made judgment calls about control, Mr. Harrison corrected. The board has reviewed documentation of Blake's actual performance. Client satisfaction scores. Project outcomes. Revenue generation. All significantly exceeded department averages. I'd shared my documentation folder with Vanessa. She'd shared it with the board. Every email. Every project file. Every performance metric. The evidence was overwhelming. Marcus looked at me. You've been planning this. No, I said honestly. You forced this. I just documented what you did. Mr. Harrison moved to the next agenda item before Marcus could respond. Due to strategic mismanagement, over-leveraged contracts, and loss of board confidence, your position as CEO is terminated effective immediately. Marcus's hands gripped the edge of the table. You can't do this. It's already done, Mr. Harrison said. Security is waiting outside to escort you out. You'll receive severance as outlined in your contract. Your company property should be returned before you leave the building. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't gloat. Didn't show any emotion at all. Security appeared in the doorway. 2 men in professional attire waiting quietly. Marcus tried to speak. His mouth moved but nothing came out clean. Just fragments of sentences that didn't connect. I built this. You can't just. Mr. Harrison stood. Thank you for your service, Marcus. Security will assist you. Marcus looked around the table one more time. Looking for support. For someone to defend him. No one met his eyes. He stood slowly. Gathered his phone and briefcase with shaking hands. Under the fluorescent lights he suddenly looked smaller. Older. He walked past my chair without looking at me. The door closed behind him with a soft click. The room stayed silent for a moment after Marcus left. Then Mr. Harrison turned to me. Blake, would you like to address the board? I stood and moved to the seat Marcus had just vacated. The leather was still warm. Thank you for your confidence, I said. I know this transition is unusual. I want to assure you that my focus is on operational stability and sustainable growth. I pulled up a presentation on the screen. One I'd prepared over the past month with Vanessa's team. These are my priorities for the first 90 days. Contract review and renegotiation. Client relationship stabilization. Internal process improvement. Financial controls implementation. I walked them through each item. Measurable. Realistic. No flash. No promises of explosive growth. Just solid management. When I finished, one board member asked, what about the staff? They're used to Marcus's leadership style. I'll address them this afternoon, I said. Transparency starts today. No more narrative games. No more favoritism. Performance speaks. Mr. Harrison nodded. When can you start? I looked at him directly. I already have. The meeting adjourned 30 minutes later. I walked back to my desk, which would be cleared out by tomorrow so I could move into the executive office. People stared as I passed. Word had already spread. I called an all-staff meeting for 3 p.m. The conference room was packed. People stood along the walls. Everyone wanted to hear what would happen next. I stood at the front. The same place Marcus used to stand when he announced Troy's promotion using my work. I'm sure you've heard that leadership has changed, I began. Marcus is no longer with the company. I've been appointed Chief Operating Officer. I could see the questions on their faces. Confusion. Uncertainty. Some relief on faces I recognized. I know this is sudden. I know many of you are concerned about what this means. So I'm going to be direct. I took a breath. No more favoritism. No more narrative games. No more taking credit for other people's work. Performance speaks. Results matter. If you do good work, you'll be recognized for it. If you don't, we'll address it honestly. Someone in the back asked, "What about current projects?" "Everything continues," I said. "But we're going to review contract commitments and make sure they're realistic. I won't ask anyone to deliver the impossible and then blame them when it doesn't work." I saw shoulders relax slightly. People who'd been carrying Marcus's unrealistic expectations for years. Before dismissing them, I did one more thing. "Kira," I said, looking at a woman who'd been passed over for promotion twice despite excellent performance. "I'd like to meet with you tomorrow about a senior analyst position." Her eyes widened. I'd just promoted someone Marcus had overlooked. Over the next month, things changed fast. I reviewed every major contract. Renegotiated terms that were unsustainable. Cut 2 expansion projects that would have drained resources without generating real value. I implemented transparent performance metrics. No more vague feedback. No more subjective evaluations. Clear expectations. Clear measurement. Clear consequences. The culture shifted when fear left the room. People started speaking up in meetings, sharing concerns, proposing ideas, trusting that their input wouldn't be used against them. Client relationships stabilized. Several had been considering leaving because Marcus overpromised and underdelivered. I met with each one personally, apologized for past issues, outlined realistic plans. 4-5 stayed. Profits began stabilizing within 6 weeks. Not skyrocketing. Not dramatic. Just steady, sustainable growth. The board noticed. Mr. Harrison called me after reviewing the quarterly report. "I'll admit I had concerns," he said. "You're young for this role. But you're exceeding expectations." "I'm just doing what needed to be done," I said. "That's exactly why it's working." For the first time in 3 years, I didn't feel small in this building. I felt like I belonged here. Marcus's reputation followed him. I didn't have to do anything. Didn't badmouth him. Didn't share details of what had happened. But word spread anyway. People who'd worked with him talked. Board members mentioned the circumstances to their networks. Clients shared their experiences. The pattern became clear to anyone paying attention. A leader who took credit for others' work. Who punished competence that threatened him. Who prioritized his ego over company health. Opportunities closed quietly. A CEO position at another firm. He made it to final interviews but didn't get an offer. A consulting role with a prestigious agency. They withdrew after reference checks. A board seat he'd been considered for. The invitation never came. Not because I interfered. I never contacted anyone about him. Never tried to damage his prospects. But patterns repeat. People who'd worked under him at previous companies started sharing their experiences. The pattern was identical everywhere he'd been. He'd succeeded by taking credit. By controlling narratives. By making sure no one beneath him outshone him. When that didn't work anymore, he had nothing. I felt something unexpected when I heard about his struggles. Not satisfaction. Not vindication. Just peace. Justice doesn't always look like revenge. The real victory wasn't the office. Wasn't the title. Wasn't even the satisfaction of removing Marcus. It was the absence of dread on Sunday nights. For 3 years, Sunday evenings had been torture. Knowing I'd have to face Marcus on Monday. Knowing I'd have to watch him take credit for my work. Knowing I'd have to smile and nod while he undermined me. Now Sunday nights were just Sunday nights. I went to work Monday mornings without that weight in my chest. Without wondering what narrative he'd spin this week. Without preparing for the next humiliation. I could just do my job. Good work without someone stealing it. Leadership without someone blocking it. Success without someone diminishing it. That was the real victory. Knowing no one controlled my ceiling anymore. Knowing my performance determined my trajectory. Knowing I'd never have to shrink myself to make someone else comfortable. One evening I stayed late reviewing reports. The building was quiet. Just the hum of ventilation and the distant sound of cleaning staff. I thought back to that projector light on my face. Marcus's slow clap. Troy holding my promotion. Felt like a lifetime ago. 3 years ago, A man told me I wasn't leadership material. He was right in a way. I wasn't leadership material for his version of leadership. The version built on ego and control and diminishing others to elevate yourself. I wasn't meant to fit under that kind of leader. I was meant to replace him. You don't beg for seats at tables that shrink you. You don't keep trying to prove yourself to people determined not to see you. You document everything. You build leverage quietly. You wait for the foundation to crack. Then you step in with something better. Not revenge. Standards. When you finally own the room, you don't need to gloat. You don't need to humiliate anyone. You just need to lead better than they did. That's the cleanest victory. Building something sustainable. Creating a culture where people succeed based on merit. Making sure no one else has to shrink themselves to survive. Marcus taught me something valuable, though he never meant to. He taught me that the system doesn't change by asking nicely. It changes when you have leverage. And sometimes the best way to win isn't climbing the ladder someone else controls. It's buying the ladder. Then rebuilding it so it actually works.